My name is Biola Alabi. I'm from Nigeria, and I am actually really excited to be here. And I'm excited that Pramesh and Nandita went before me, because a lot of what I will share with you about my life is around identity and also around what it is like being in the same industry, but actually from an executive perspective. So I live in Nigeria, but I work across the continent. I work for a Pan-African pay TV company, and I'm a television executive pretty much. What we do is we aggregate international content, we aggregate local content, and we basically try to create platforms around African stories and telling African stories. But as some of you would notice, I have a very interesting accent, which sounds more like yours. And that's really around identity and what that really means to me. When I was 17, I moved to America, and I went to the University of Cincinnati. And being here at the library is really inspirational, because when I was growing up in Nigeria in primary and secondary school, and I went to a very good secondary school. It was a boarding school in Nigeria. But our library was probably a quarter the size of this place. And when I was in primary school, the library was this size. And I spent a lot of time in the library. I loved reading, and I always had this bigger view of the world. And so when I got to University of Cincinnati at 17, and people asked me where I was from, and I said Nigeria, and no one knew what that meant. I was shocked, because I had come from Nigeria, where we had a huge sense of the world and what was happening around us, and we were much more connected to a global world. And so being in Cincinnati, Ohio, I felt like I had to really educate people around what it meant to be from Nigeria, what it meant to be African, and what it actually meant to be West African. And so constantly going through these whole different identities. But also Cincinnati is a very strange place if you're a black person and you're living in Cincinnati. It is a very segregated city. It has moments of racial tension. And so this was the first place that I actually, for the first time, had to identify myself as a black person. When you live in Nigeria, where everyone is black, the idea of being black is so inconsequential. So I would never use black as a descriptor of who I was. And until I came to America, I had to start using that word to describe who I was. And I had to become a black female. And then I had to find my voice as a black female and what that meant. And so being in a library really reminds me of how I became what I would call a global person and started to think globally. And so today, I don't think of myself really, I think of myself as African. I don't think of myself as really Nigerian anymore. Nigeria is just a place I live now, but I work across the continent. So in my experience of living in Cincinnati and really being on campus, one of the things I first did was think about what it meant to be African, what it meant to be Nigerian, and also what it would mean for me going forward. And I've really noticed that if you looked at images around you of Africa, there were really, at that point, there were very little images, but really the images that I would see were of, and if anyone remembers at the time, Sally Struthers, help and feed these children. And I just could never understand how that was the only image of Africa that would be on television. Because the Africa I had come from was a beautiful place. It was a place full of life, full of joy. If you look at the population of Africa, it's almost 1 billion people. So you would think, people that are producing this much, sad people don't really produce that many people all the time. So there obviously is some happiness happening here. There is love here. There were never images of love, of African people falling in love or falling out of love. You just don't, I bet if I asked you before I started telling you this, what do you think of when you think of Africa? I think the first thing you would all probably say today is Ebola. But this is obviously, these are obviously images that the media has a huge hand in projecting, in changing, and in building. And so this is really one of the things where I love what I do. I fell into media. I didn't go to school to study media. I went to school to do what every immigrant child does, which is study one of the sciences. So my goal was to be a doctor. That did not work. I did not end up being a pharmacist either, and I didn't end up being an engineer. So media was something that I fell into. But once I fell into media, I really understood how powerful the media was, and how creating platforms in which people can tell their stories, and in which we can actually change the way people think and see images because of how powerful they are. And that's why the work they do is really interesting. And some of the stuff that Pramesh talks about is on the other, I sort of engage with those issues on the other hand from an African perspective. As some of you know, Africans are extremely, there are a lot of legal ramifications around homosexuality and also around how we project the homosexuality in our television world. And so as a television exec, it's really important for us to understand how far and how much we can push the boundaries of identity, because we also can't live on a continent where we don't believe that there are different identities and different sexualities. And so these challenges come up all the time, so it's really interesting to talk to meet someone like Pramesh while I'm here, who's always pushing the boundary, and I'm sort of sitting in a place where I'm constantly self-censoring and trying to help us understand how far we can push and how far we can go. But really one of the things that I've been able to do over the last 7 years working in Africa is working on creating platforms of expression, and that's how I like to look at it. I know it's pay TV, and there are also people can say, but it's a commercial venture. But actually, commercial ventures don't actually flourish unless you have people that are making change and people that are disrupting and people that are doing different things. And so as a pay TV platform in Africa, my company, before I joined them, were really focused on aggregating international content. And so what would happen is we would come to America, we would go to England, we would buy content, we would put it together and put channels out. But what was happening around digital technology was, as digital technology became much more pervasive and everyone could pick up a camera, people started to really tell their stories on the continent. But that story was being told in very different pockets. So people in Nigeria were telling their stories, people in Kenya were telling their stories, people in Uganda were telling their stories, but there wasn't really a platform where we could share those stories and we could actually see different parts of our lives. And we can then understand more about what we actually shared in common than what was different about us. And so one of the things we did at first was create a channel. And when you're in a pay TV business, it's really important to create opportunities for other people. And the opportunities you're creating are for independent producers. So these are people that work really hard to go and produce a movie, and they bring it onto the platform. So there was a lot of engagement. There was a lot of empowering and training that we had to do for producers. And over the last 7 years, we've gone from having one channel to over 12 channels across Africa that basically 24 hours a day project stories. And some of you might have heard about Nollywood. Nollywood is one of the platforms that we've been really able to enable the growth and also be change makers in that industry. So in Nigeria, in Kenya, in Ghana, you can make a film from anywhere from $5,000 to $5 million, and there's a platform where that film can be shown. We also create a lot of television stories, which you'll see some of the stuff on the boards in the back. But I think what's been really amazing for me and becoming a global citizen is how I've passed through so many different places and different countries. And constantly from my first day at University of Cincinnati, the one thing I continue to think about is how can I expand my world? How can I expand my view? And how can I continue to see the world from different lenses? So I'm really grateful to the World Fellows Program for giving me the opportunity to be here and spend almost 5 months with 15 other amazing people from different parts of the world that challenge me every day to think of myself and my identity in different ways, and also to continue to be a global citizen. So I hope tonight you can engage, and if you want to learn more about the industry, the television industry in Africa, I'll be more than happy to share. Thank you.